Good morning out there, in there, out there. I'm saying this for the second time. Do you know we just filmed the whole show and the camera wasn't on? How's that? Well, good morning from in here, out here. Vivi's on the floor because, I went, oh my God, and threw the book up in the air and everything's... Anyway, take two. Good morning. Hi, Mark. Welcome to Sentimentalist. Here's Vivi's nose, of course. What's this? Not much good news from Lake Wobegon, but we'll find something here. Whew. I can't remember what I did. Well, there's something mystical about it. There's a show out there floating around. There it goes. Dennis Hendrickson has a new book. He's a fascinating, remarkable poet. He even uses different colored paper in his book and does so many different things with structure and style. And Dennis Hendrickson, what a lovely man, too. Gosh. Well, and that funny thing, my sister called yesterday and we chatted and she said, so what did you do yesterday? And I said, oh. And I couldn't remember. Yesterday. And sometime during the conversation, I reminded her of a story when we were little kids. But yesterday, oh boy. Yeah. My life is getting shorter, but the days are getting longer. Hey. Sunlight earlier, later, pretty good. Pretty wonderful. Yeah, let's see if we have any notes. Oh, the gang from G.F. Corrick's wonderful anthology that raises money to help the people in Ukraine. A number of us did a reading at the Fountain Street Church. That's not a church, that's a cathedral. And that reading is available on YouTube, and it was done really well with cameras and different angles, couple angles. And you can find it, or if you want me to send you the link, it's jack@riddle.com, which I shouldn't send out over the airwaves, but there I did it. So I did another thing where I goofed up, because I can't do it all. I can't remember all that stuff, and so I get myself in trouble. And then I end up getting things, like, do you get these? XYVWWUO to DW956. Hit this link in order to pay your bill. Yeah, I get that. Pay my bill. And I'd fall for that if it weren't for Julie. But now I just goofed up again. So if any of you out there are scam artists, go to it. Yeah. So yeah, somebody asked me, aren't you going to do a reading kind of thing? But it's not till July, so I have time to remind you. July 27th. We're going to combine, I'm going to pick out 4 or 5 pieces of music and some poems and put them together. And I like that idea because I can promise you that the music will be music you'll appreciate. That part I know. Yeah. So, speaking of memory, my buddy and I, Max Milo, had this routine where it goes, how do you get there? You get down, see that gas station down there at the end of the street? You remember, what was the name of the guy who had that station? Well, it's right across from, you know that couple, what the hell is their name? They live in that White House, I think. What the hell is their name? Because they were best friends with, I think he worked at, what was the name of that company? Names. They go. Boop. They just go. How about those Hope women's and men's teams? They're both in the national championship tournament, both of them. Good luck Friday and make it through Saturday. Wow. Wonderful coaches. They really know how to coach and they know how to behave. Not like those people, that you watch on TV. Last night it was Bruce Pearl going out of his mind. It was just ugly to see somebody behave that way. But these coaches, Brian Morehouse, Greg Mitchell, winning coaches who know how to be winning people. Hey, there's a cliche, huh? Yeah. Boy, there was a sad thing at the University of Louisville. Did you see that? Their coach, he's new. His name's Kenny Payne. And he's a lovely man. Gentle, sweet, lovely man. And it was senior night at Louisville, and they've had a really rough season. They've only won a few games, a lot of dissension on the team. And do you know, at senior night, he goes to introduce the seniors out at mid-court, and none of them showed up. Just humiliated them. I always think it's good to try to learn, even though I screwed it up a minute ago and when the thing didn't work and got frustrated and threw my book down. Why am I laughing? It's not funny. Anyway, why don't we learn that what you do now you remember later, or what you do has consequences? I can see these guys who didn't come out for senior night. They go in a job interview, and the guy across the desk, or the woman across the desk says, aren't you one of those players that didn't show up for senior night and let down your whole team? End of interview. Yeah. Oh well, I'm retired. Let's see what's in the book. Nothing much. Rough week. This is the big news, though, and it came to me, and a friend of mine, Jim Ellis, we've been talking about this for 20 years, the end of the humanities. The drop is over 50-some% at most places in enrollment in the humanities. Everybody wants a skill. And I think I'm right when I say this, but my advisees, I would say, take these classes. But there's two things. A skill, once you learn it, becomes that skill, and that's fine, that's wonderful, and maybe you make money with that skill. You major in, sciences and business, etc. But, you see all this behind me here? That's the rich part. And I'm glad I like to read. I don't have much left, but that's it. And it's at this point, so when I came to the college, these people loved literature. They loved it. There was a professor named Jim Prinz, and every time he read and studied, talked about Madame Bovary, he cried. Yeah, he cried. And do you know what you learned from that? No, not cynical. They did. They might not have known it. They learned a lot when he did that, when that happened, I should say. So in the New Yorker, of all things, this week, the lead big article is Talking to Ourselves, followed by the end of the English major. I have thumbs that don't have any feelings, so it's hard for me to turn these pages. Anyway, it's in here. It's called the end of the English major. And I remember the big change that came from being involved with the book, in which you just struggled with the characters or cared about them or worried about them or empathized. You learned empathy and understanding and etc. from reading these. And you learned that life was so complex you could never explain it. And that's what you learn. Ambiguity, paradox, learning to live with, there's 14 ways of looking at a blackbird. No, there's 15. That's what you learned. But then it became, you can't articulate this. And here's a good example. So I had this wonderful student in my poetry writing class, and he had a death in the family, and he was torn apart. And I told him when he came to class that day that if he wanted, we were going to do this, but if he wanted to just get it out and write some stuff, go ahead, which he did. And he just went on his own over there. Well, one of my colleagues, I don't know why, got a hold of this poem, I don't know how, or this writing. It wasn't finished, of course. He just brought it up to me, held it all but in my face, and said, "You teach this?" And I said, "What, poetry? Yeah, I do." And he said, "This is not any good." And I don't know how I had the presence of mind, but I looked right at him and I said, "Do you know its value?" And he just turned around and walked away. That's the same person who, during the interview, I voted no on the person, the only one to vote no. I'm very proud of that. Out to dinner, and he asked me about things, and I said, "Well, I begin by assuming the poem has value, or the person wouldn't write it." He said, "What's value mean?" His poor kids. What's value mean? I don't know. I just know it is. What's a dog mean? Oh, Viv, what's a dog mean? Can you tell me? Viv's down here. What's a value? We tried to write a mission statement in this new group. I wanted to use the word wisdom. No, what's it mean? We don't know what wisdom is. We don't know any of that. None of those things that matter. Imagine that. So it ends up, we had more English majors in their exit interviews say, "Well, I used to like to read, I don't like to read anymore." You know why? Because the only reason they were reading was to write some paper. And the paper had to be a theory applied to the work. I read a poem in Fountain Street Cathedral the other night that I was telling you about. It's a mom and a little girl on a bus leaving Ukraine and going to Poland, and they're talking. And according to theory, I have no right to speak in the voice of a little girl, and I certainly have no right to speak in the voice of a mother. None. Here's part of a little excerpt from the New Yorker. We're very concerned with the beauty of things. This is a school that's celebrating the humanities. Very concerned with the beauty of things, with aesthetics, and ultimately with the value of works of art. I think there's a hunger for the thrill that comes from truth and beauty. We could never... Did you hear that? Isn't that one... That's what I thought it was. Even if I disagreed with Henry David Thoreau. Holy cow! What a wonderful experience to meet Henry David Thoreau. That's it. I met Henry. How else? And then later the beef. Here's my beef, he says. I only had one with the Obamas, and it was that every sentence out of their mouth about school was STEM, 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 STEM. Hear that? STEM, 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 STEM. And it's the same from Trump and from Biden too, STEM. Science, technology, engineering, math. Do I have anything against them? No. Not at all. Not at all. I just want English, philosophy, religion, history. I want students to discover what happens when you are with those things. You're with them. You're not reading it in order to be 25 years old and write another paper. Don't you just want to be with Toni Morrison? Dennis Hendrickson? Got to tell you this again. George Bleasby was a renowned, wonderful professor I had. The old school, tweed coat, you know, the whole thing. He would not let us read any criticism. You will not. If I find out you've been in the library in the critical section, out. And he was the most dignified, gentle, loving man. He brought one book to class, the novel. We were taking a course called The Novel. We had to read 11 novels. I think I read 3 or 4. And it's not because I blew it off. It's just I couldn't read fast enough for the semester. And he would start the class by asking a question, and that would get things going. Us and the novel and Dr. Bleasby. And when we were reading Charles Dickens' Hard Times, and he came in, he asked a question, no response. Another question, no response. And then he said, how many of you have finished the novel? And no hands went up. And he just very dignified, very gently took the novel, picked it up, stood up from behind his little desk, and said, I shall return when you've learned to respect Mr. Dickens, and walked out. And we finished that novel by Monday when he walked back in. I'm sorry, George, for what's happened. It would break your heart. Your love of it all. Well, hey, I hope the camera was on. I don't want to make a fool of myself. When I found out the camera was on, I took this and threw it down the floor. Always had trouble that way. Man, I work on it, but I'm no good. Okay, here's a poem. The days are longer, it's beautiful, sun's out. Did you see Jupiter and Venus last night? Like this? 400 million miles away from each other, but here they were like this? Wow. Talk about awe. Just stared at it. And then 2 planes went by. Looked like they were visiting. Wow. See if it's still out there tonight, okay? In the west. This is about clouds, though, called watching. Clouds, of course, are the greatest things in the world. Cumulus, cirrus, nimbus, you name it. How they arrive out of nowhere, it seems. Coast across the sky's scrim, some thin and wispy as milkweed seed, some seemingly stuffed with down. Great pillows for God's huge and heavy head. These are, of course, the benevolent ones. Even at night, we know they're passing, silently above us, as if some kindly neighbor has come out in the cold to pull the comforter up to our chin. Of course, there are the grays, carriers of uncertainty, holding perhaps rain or sleet, snow or hail, or not a drop of anything at all. We can never know. Then, of course, the dark and bleak, lugging a foreboding storm, clouds that send us under cover into resigned and listless listening to the chaos on the roof, the slash across the car's front window, wipers all but useless against the tipping of some cosmic water barrel. But then, again, of course, no matter what the cause, what the effect, We just might see any cloud, eerie dark, marshmallow white, erasure gray, become an old man's hat, a Conestoga wagon, a hippopotamus, the face of Aunt Louise. Take care. Try to be cheerful. Be kind.